What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Aquilon here, and of course, welcome back to each and every one of you. It is the war within time. The alpha has started. Many players, or creators rather, have started their journey through this new alpha build, and Blizzard is changing things up a little with how the alpha works. Very similar in some ways to Dragonflight, although there's a lot of changes that we're going to be talking about in today's video. I sort of read through everything that there is, even some of the transmog stuff and the bait and the mount stuff, even though I generally don't care about those things, not because they're not important, they're just not really important to me. I don't play WoW for transmogs or anything like that. I play for the story most of the time, and I'm very interested always in the game design elements of World of Warcraft, so that really is going to be the focus. Remember, you can join me live tomorrow night for Baron's Chat. That will be episode 4. Just check for it on the channel. It is somewhere. Live, we're going to be talking everything The War Within. All right, so after going through everything that has been released thus far, and please remember that this is only the first phase. Blizzard is doing this alpha test very similarly to how they did it in Dragonflight, where they're going to be doing the zones, zone by zone, and this really is to maximize the amount of players that is thrown at specific problems, rather than having, 100,000 people in various zones and various degrees of leveling. You now have people hyper focused on a single part of the expansion, so that and everything within it can be tasted, and then eventually it will open up into a proper beta that will then present us with the whole thing. I'm still a little salty, and I'm gonna take a couple of minutes just to talk about that the story is included in the alpha and in the beta. I really, really hope that in the future, Blizzard will stop doing this. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't taste the zones. Of course, taste the zones. Give people a way to play through the zones. Do something akin to the Shadowlands leveling where you didn't have to do any of the quests. And that's fine. Let people taste everything that there is to taste. But leave the story out of the game until the game goes live. The issue is we're already dealing with a 3-day early access that a lot of people are going to see the game before everyone else. But now the story is also getting spoiled. And before anyone says, but Akko, you just don't have to check spoilers. The problem isn't so much the spoilers and the spoilers that is obviously avoidable by the overwhelming majority of players. The problem is more that the story presented to you in the alpha and in the beta isn't the complete story. You're missing out on a bunch of cutscenes because cutscenes are generally speaking not in the alpha and the beta builds. You're also missing out on a lot of context because we don't actually know how the start of this entire thing kicks off. We load into the game when Dalaran is already destroyed. It lays in tatters. We don't know what happened there. We don't exactly know what transpired there. And this is going to lead to a lot of people jumping to conclusions. A lot of people creating scenarios in their mind and then just sort of extrapolating from there. And now this influences every other storyline because you're not seeing conclusions to storylines. You're not seeing the beginning of storylines. So it just creates a very broken experience. So I would have preferred if the story kids up. But anyways, I digress. No need to continue on with that. Let's talk about the things that I am most excited for. And before we get into the mega stuff, and there's specifically 2 things that I want to talk about at length here. But before we do that, Mr. GM just had an interview with Holly Longdale. We reacted to it last night over on Twitch. Follow me there if you want to. And if you want to talk all things gaming and WoW and whatever. But he had a talk with Holly Longdale, and one of the very interesting things there is Blizzard's new approach. She spoke at length about the new concept and the way Blizzard now thinks about the game. Blizzard is a lot more willing now to take risks. In fact, they have an entire team who is now permanently established to just create risky content. Content that they're not sure is going to work, like Plunderstorm, like the Mist of Pandaria remix. That's their only job, and they're going to continue doing that. When asked whether these features will eventually become permanent, their idea was, yes, if we do something and it's really loved by the player base, and we see a path forward for that to become a permanent feature, we will absolutely. This kind of confirms the whole, they're experimenting on things, and these are just early experiments. I kind of hope that they made that clear from the beginning, because I think it would have cleared up a lot of confusion, but still, a very, very, very good change. And then, of course, their approach now to the game. They even announced that they are looking into, at least when Mr. GM asked, she said, this is a problem that they will definitely look to solve now. the way that Europeans and Americans cannot play together. This is something that they're actively going to be looking at. And in this, all I would want is the ability to swap freely between NA and EU. I don't even care if my characters on EU are in EU and I can't play them in NA. I have to start a new character in NA. That's perfectly fine because they just announced that there is a massive XP reduction coming in the War Within. So leveling is going to be mega quick because I think Blizzard have finally realized leveling in World of Warcraft is not why people play World of Warcraft. The leveling experience is very jaded, very janky, very disconnected from everything else. So it's not really worth it. Get people to max level as quickly as possible so they can start playing the actual game, or at least where everything happens. So that's not a problem. I would gladly, but I would like to be able, gladly level, but I would like to be able to play with people on NA and EU because I have friends in both. Yes, I do actually have friends. But all right, so that all being said, let's talk about what is, at this current moment in time, probably the thing that I am most excited for. And there's two of them. So I'm going to start with the one that I'm least excited for, but still very excited for, just to be clear. And that is the Delve system in the War Within. Now, it is important to note that the only access we have currently to Delves on the alpha is the base version of it. And it's already been confirmed in an interview by Ian Hesychostas that Delves are similarly to Mythic Plus. They're going to have higher levels, and these levels are going to be added to as the expansion goes on. It's going to start off at a difficulty that most people will be able to achieve. And then it's going to gradually go up, and it will eventually hit a difficulty where only those that really want a challenge and is really good enough to, defeat that challenge will be able to do that. And I think that's perfect. Delves is very much a sort of casual approach to the game, and there needs to be content for casuals of all levels, both casuals that really don't want a challenge, they just want to be able to do stuff, and then also, sort of casuals that they like a challenge, they just don't like the more organized PvP or PvE challenges in the game. Now, to this, I should also point out that Holly Longdale, in her interview with Mr. GM, and we're going to be jumping between multiple interviews because I've watched quite a few. With his interview with Holly Longdale, Holly admitted that they have finally started to collect a lot more data in Dragonflight than what they've ever done before. And one of the key things that they've been doing with this data is they have redevised the way they look at the player base. I can only gather that it used to be they looked at the player base as people who PvP, people who PvE, and then everyone else. And that was really the three groups, and all of the data had to make sense there. But looking at their data and looking at the way people play and looking at the feedback on the forums, they started to realize that this approach, the old approach of dividing players, wasn't sufficient. It wasn't actually giving them the insights that they required in order to create content for the player base. And what they've firmly realized is that, yes, there is such a thing as casuals, but casuals are not equal. You have casual casuals, you have mid-core casuals, you have high-core casuals, right? So you have multiple layers of casuals that play the game in very different ways, but they're considered casuals because they don't raid on Mythic, right? Or they don't PvP in the highest level of arenas. But they're still casuals, they still want types of content for themselves, and so they are taking a more holistic approach. Now, how do the delves work? Well, they're seamless entrances. You walk up to a delve and you will see this sort of cloudy, misty opening. And then you click on it, you get a prompt, you go into it. Once you're inside it, you will talk to Bran. At least for this season, he will be your companion. There you can ask Bran to take a specific role, tank, healer, or DPS, whatever you need in this run, and Bran will then do that job for you. You will find mining nodes and herbing nodes within the delve, and if you don't have herbalism or mining, Bran will get the herbs for you. As you go through it, you will have sort of like a special scenario, kind of like Mist of Pandaria, where you go through and you kill different mobs and you sort of unlock different stories, and you'll also get side quests like rare monsters that may show up in the delve that if you kill them, you get extra stuff from them. And then finally you get to the end of this. It seems like delves are going to be not long, but also not super short, because there's actually saving points throughout the delve that as you pass them, you will, when you die, actually start from the saving point rather than having to start right at the beginning. But anyways, once you get to the end of this, you'll kill the final boss, and then you enter a room, and it's filled with treasure chests and piles of gold and, all the nice goodies that you would like to see. And as you go up in tiers, there will be more chests and even more gold, but some of those chests will actually require keys. So you would probably have to do a couple of delves in order to get certain keys so that you can actually unlock certain chests. Another thing that's very important about delves is they are catered to 1 to 5 people, so you can absolutely do these solo. That's why Bran is in the group with you, but you can also do it with your friends. It really depends on how you want to do it, and all we now need to see is what does the scaling options look like? Because if this can scale high enough to be difficult enough, this can absolutely become a way for people to play it. Another thing that is super important to note is that Blizzard have confirmed, and I'm sort of attaching this to delves because I think it is in the same vein, they're taking a brand new approach to the way the story is being told in World of Warcraft, and that, of course, for us, the fans of the lore, is the most important part of all of this. The story previously had to, generally speaking, happen outside of raids and outside of dungeons, and inside raids and dungeons, they would really only ever deal somewhat with conclusions, and you didn't really need to do those in order to understand how the story played out. And the reason for it is, what if you level later and you don't get a group for a low-level dungeon? What if you have to wait 20 minutes in order to get a group for a low-level dungeon? None of these are feelings of fun if you're trying to continue the story, right? And more specifically, the story was never going to be gated behind a dungeon. So you didn't have to do the dungeon in order to continue the story. That is all gone now. Delves and dungeons are now active vehicles within the storytelling. So you will absolutely reach points in the story where the only way to complete this story is to go into the dungeon and actually finish the dungeon so that you can then continue with your story. So a lot more of a holistic view of the storytelling sort of mechanisms. And why can they do this? Follower dungeons. Yes, that is being carried forward, and I'm assuming Blizzard is also going to make updates to make it even better, but I like it. I personally think that this is a really good idea. I think dungeons have a very unique tool set, and it can tell some pretty cool and interesting stories within it. All I want to see from Blizzard now is maybe like a deviation, where you have the story dungeons, which, is filled with story, filled with RP, filled with all of the fun stuff that you get to see. And then once you get to like the Mythic Zero or even like the heroic dungeons, most of that stuff falls away, and now it does just become this test of skill, and you don't have to deal with a bunch of RP and a bunch of story that is going to continuously slow you down. So, very cool additions, I think, and just overall super, super excited for it. But now, let's talk about my favorite thing in this expansion, and that has to be warbands. Now, for those of you, very quick refresher, what is a warband? Well, a warband is the new approach for Blizzard in how they deal with alts, where previously every single character on your account would have been seen as an individual character. That is your character, and whatever that character does, it does, but none of your alts benefit from what that character does, apart from a couple of things like profession stuff and so on and so forth. Warbands is a complete reimagining of how World of Warcraft works, and Ian Azicostas in WoWcast actually referenced this. He said that their philosophical approach to World of Warcraft has always been sort of single character, right? You have a character, that's your character, and that's the character you play. If you make another character, that's a character, and that's a character you have to play. Now, they have finally realized that this approach is outdated. The game really lends itself to the playing of alts. Most people have alts, and a lot of people love alt play because it gives you a fresh new way of looking at the world and just experiencing things that you've already experienced from a completely different perspective. So now the game is also following suit. Warbands is effectively, to put it in philosophical terms, it's the game no longer viewing each of your characters as an individual mechanism, but rather viewing your account as the individual mechanism. So things that you do on your characters will automatically also apply for the most part, to alts. You can gear alts by simply playing your main, or gear your main by playing some of your alts. So no time that you spend on Azeroth on a different character than your main will ever truly be wasted time. They've even announced that once you've hit max level on one character, there is a stacking debuff that now applies to all other characters on your account that increases XP gains, right? And the more characters you level, the higher this stacks. So the more alts you have, the faster you start leveling alts, and so on and so forth. So truly, it is now becoming a holistic experience. There were talks about dungeons and dungeon lockouts and raid lockouts and raid skips and things of that nature for alts. I think in the interview was a text interview, and I have not read through the whole thing. So here I am actually talking. I'm not entirely sure what that question was referencing, but it was a group interview, and I believe it was Taliesin that asked this about raid skips for alts. And all I can assume here is that if you've already done the raid, because a lot of the time you do get these quest lines that they can only really end inside the raid. So in order to get this quest line off of your quest log, you have to go do the raid. But this always sucks if you're an alt and you're sort of starting this alt 8 months into the expansion, and I have to complete the first raid, but no one's doing the first raid. That sucks dick, right? To try and finish the story then. And raid skip seems to be a thing that Blizzard is going to be approaching here, where if you've done it on your main, you can skip that on your alts. Your alts wouldn't have to go do the raid because, well, you've already done the raid. You know what's in there. Warbands truly, to me, is the most exciting feature that's ever been announced in World of Warcraft, and not just for what we're getting in the War Within, but more importantly, what it signifies for the future of WoW, because Ian literally said this on the WoWcast. They are now using the warband system to re-evaluate everything that they do in World of Warcraft. So every new thing that they add in World of Warcraft comes from the perspective of the account is what we're designing for. We're not designing for one character and then all other characters have to do this one thing. We're designing it in such a way that the account benefits from this thing and the account can do these things, and you really become just, you may be one of those players that eventually turn out that your paladin does certain types of content, your warlock does other types of content, your rogue does certain types of content, as the content gets a little bit more fleshed out. Maybe eventually we get a Torghast-esque kind of roguelite game mode, so there's a lot of things going into this, and there's a lot of potential for future things to go into this. So I am super excited for it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the video. Like if you liked, dislike if you didn't. And of course, remember, for $1 a month, you can help keep this channel free from sponsorships that want to sell you stuff that you do not need. The link to Patreon is in the description down below. Massive shout out to all of the patrons. If you have thoughts, if you want to tell me what you think of the War Within, let me know in the comment section down below. I always love reading that. And remember, I'll see you tomorrow night for Baron's Chat. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, be kind to each other, be good to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.